On the 33rd day out of Earth Central, the special agent had written itself out of W space and re-entered the normal continuum. The little 1,400-ton vessel fell free toward the fifth planet of Procyon for half an hour before planetary drive was applied to slow it into an orbit. Alan Stewart, linguist, in this maiden mission of Contact Incorporated, felt seasick again during the period of free fall. Of the 6 men aboard, he was the only one who hadn't spent at least one hitch in the solar system patrol. He was doggedly trying to steady his nerves by floating a row of dictionaries in mid-air when the intercom startled him. It was the voice of James Gordon, ship's captain and head of the new firm. "All hands. We start spiraling in shortly and we should land on Azura in about 5 hours. Nestor, relieve White in the drive room. The rest of you come on up to control for a final briefing." The bony little linguist sighed, put away his books, and unstrapped himself. Nausea made him hiccup. Detouring sadly around the intricate, day-old wreckage of what had been a beautiful cephaloid unit, he swung stiffly out of the lab. In the corridor he had to squeeze past a badly torn-up wall. Dan Rogers, one of the 2 planetary scouts, shut off a welding torch and coasted along with him. "Little old piece of nickel iron sure raised heck, didn't it, Mr. Stewart?" drawled the scout. "Come out into normal space for 2 minutes to get a bearing, and, wham!" He propelled himself along with the effortless efficiency of a man accustomed to doing without gravity. Stewart, correcting course with some difficulty, took a moment to answer. "Oh, the meteor. Yes, indeed it did. My leg is still stiff, and of course half my equipment is just junk now. But I guess we were rather fortunate at that, since none of us was killed. All the way to Procyon, 3.4 parsecs. Dear me." He clucked, shaking his head, and wondered again how the other 5 men in the crew could take these things so casually. He drifted into the control room with Rogers and hovered near the desk. Bretner, the other scout, came in playing some outlandish sort of guitar. White, engineer and assistant astrogator, joined him in a final caterwauling chorus of the Demon of Demos. The ship's captain swung his chair to face them, his angular face folding into a responsive grin. Then he waved a teletape at the 4 men and looked more serious. "Here's Patrol's latest summary of the situation," he announced. "Still no response from Procyon V, otherwise known as Azura. No activity in the ruined cities. No further clashes with traders, because the traders have given up. However, the natives are still taking potshots from the woods at any scouting parties that dare to sit down on the planet. Every attempt at contact is fiercely rejected. The patrol lads, naturally, are forbidden to shoot back, at least until they find out what this is all about, which, of course, is where our own little expedition of specialists comes in. Incidentally, it seems fairly certain the natives know nothing of radio, so we'll be safe in using microwave to feel our way down in the dark." He accepted a cigarette from Rogers and nodded toward a month-old report titled, "Unofficial Data as of October 31, 2083, Procyon V, Azura. I know we have precious little to go in there with, but that's the situation. 1,000,000 credits from Earth Central, if we establish friendly contact." He smoked a while, gray eyes on the ceiling. Then, as nobody spoke, he added, "The patrol has had 2 more skirmishes, not far from here, with what we've called the invader culture. None of their ships has been captured, but it's fairly certain they're the same vicious crowd we've fought near Rigel, Alpha Centauri, and so on. They seem to be heading this way again slowly. Here." He handed out half a dozen photographs of strange-looking spacecraft. "They're undoubtedly the gang that blew hell out of Azura a few years ago, before we got here, and gave the natives such a violent dislike of strangers. The invaders' weapons are somewhat inferior to ours, but he apparently has the considerable advantage of having superior position in regard to bases, particularly around here. The patrol simply can't stand up to a determined attack in this region unless a base is made available, preferably on Azura." Bretner said, softly, "That's what we're really after, isn't it? Nobody's handing us 1,000,000 credits just for cultural purposes." The leader of the expedition nodded. "Yep. Once we talk to these Azurans, I think we can convince them we all have a common enemy. An enemy who seems to enjoy smashing things just for fun. I have a hunch the Azurans expect the invaders back, too. That might account for their apparent determination to remain hidden." He reached for the log. "Incidentally, what's the latest on the damage situation?" Stuart shook his head unhappily and brushed hair out of his eyes. One cephaloid is completely ruined. It was the one I had trained to translate into universal speech from whatever other language would be fed into it later. I was going to teach it what Azuran I could pick up and use it as a direct interpreter. We have to use universal speech, you see, because cephaloids simply can't handle homonyms such as see and see, or through and through. However, his worried look lessened. The multiple analyzer is all right. And the standby, originally conditioned only for generalized language response, has been retrained in universal speech and will learn Azuran from the analyzer. He managed a feeble smile. After all, the natives are manlike, and we know they had a city culture much like ours, so there is a good possibility of our finding mutually intelligible symbols. And we know what their language sounds like, thanks to the trader who got away with the recording. White spoke up. I hope you weren't counting too much on the portable teleview, Mr. Stewart. It's a total loss. So is the long-range microphone. It's going to be tough to study their language at a distance. He looked at Gordon. The ship is okay, Chief, except for the debris we're still cutting away. All the animals are dead. I guess you knew that. And all we've salvaged from the jeep is the power unit and one repulsor. We'll have to walk where we can't use the scout ship. Bretner, when the captain looked at him, said quietly, we're awful low on food. Just about enough to get us back, with 3 or 4 days to spare. Can't we eat any of this Azuran stuff? Gordon shook his head. The water and air are all right, but there's no food for us down there. Good thing, in a way. He laughed at the surprised expressions. All terrestrial life is based on complexes of iron, magnesium, or copper, but Azuran life seems to be built on cobalt complexes. Consequently both sides are immune to the diseases of the other. You remember the terrible plagues that hit the terrestrial port areas in the old days, and the grim effects of our landings on Alpha Centauri 3 and Proxima 2. But the biostat labs report that terrestrial and Azuran tissue cultures have only a toxic effect on each other, no parasitic viability whatever. He looked up at the chronometer. About time to begin our spiral, if we're to land before daybreak in that area we picked out. Let's get some sleep. White, you'll relieve me for a couple of hours, soon as we've established our trajectory. Stewart, on the way out, picked up the sheaf of papers summarizing what was known about Azura. He strapped into his bunk absent-mindedly and lay there trying to visualize his first non-solar planet. Many kinds of intelligent animals, the reports agreed. Evidently a mutation leading to intelligence had occurred quite early in the diversification of the animal phyla. One of the traders, said the report, claimed he had even learned to converse in a limited way with what he called monkey rats. These had about the intelligence of a 5-year-old human, and displayed the group cooperation common to many Azuran forms. Too bad the trader hadn't been able to stay there longer. He had finally found some of the natives, just at the time they had found him. He was preparing to leave his ship and accept their thanks for the fine gifts he had set out, when gifts, trees, and nearby boulders began to blow up all around. He had taken off without further discussion. 4 other traders and 3 patrol ships had failed. A small freighter, landing to make emergency repairs, had disappeared. The only weapon the natives had, apparently, was a disruptor of some sort, with a range of only 2 or 3 kilometers. But the wreckage of the city showed plainly that the invaders had used weapons of the same type as Earth's, probably with a range of hundreds of kilometers. That meant. He awoke, struggling, as if from a nightmare. The klaxon was sounding off, jarring his teeth. Gordon's slightly nasal voice came over the loudspeaker, landing stations, everybody. We're sitting down in 15 minutes. The linguist hastily unfastened his safety belts, rolled out, and scrambled into primary space gear. Secondary equipment? He asked Rogers, who was getting dressed beside him. Nah, no armor. Leave your oxygen off, too. This is a classy planet, just like home. Stewart scrambled down to the control room and strapped himself in beside the stern view screen. He could hear White and Bretner in the drive room, sleepily arguing about who had mislaid the coffee jug. Such nonchalance. He thought. Trembling with excitement, he nearly dropped his camera. I wonder how soon I can get some pictures, he muttered. If I could only photograph our landing, that would really liven up the next meeting of the Philological Society. He had already taken over 100 pictures of the expedition, and his hobby was the subject of much ribbing from the rest of the 6-man corporation. Gordon looked over from the control board and interrupted his thoughts. "Stuart. See anything out there?" A dial over the linguist's head indicated only 100 meters to go. His screen showed a dark landscape, illuminated by two of the four moons. "Tree directly below," he announced. "Better move to the red side about 20 meters." The vessel shifted slightly and eased down smoothly under Gordon's practiced handling. Relays clacked, the drive hummed softly. Suddenly a rough branch scraped along the side, making metallic echoes in the double walls. Seconds later the ship settled with a gritty crunching. A few kicks of the drive leveled it off. 2. There was profound silence for a moment after the drive died away. Someone yelled "Wahoo!" Then Rogers came clattering down the ladder. He beckoned to Stuart, who was already climbing out of the seat eagerly. "Time for the landing party," said the scout. He eyed the camera. "Remember now, play your cards close to your chest. Don't go skittering off to take pictures. First we patrol once around the ship, then we get the camouflage nets pegged down, right away. Then we sit tight till we've had a good look around in daylight." As they approached the arms locker, they found Nestor drawing out 3 blast rifles. He held out 2 of them. "Your weapons, gentlemen," said the chubby engineer, bowing. "I'm guarding the airlock while you're out there. And next time we cut cards for this little privilege, I'm going to shuffle the deck myself. 6 years in the patrol before this trip, and I've been first to land only once in my life." The linguist smiled, feeling his taut nerves relax a bit. He pushed the outside test button beside the lock at the end of the corridor. A green light flashed. "Air has already been okayed," Nestor told him. Stuart pushed another button. The inner door withdrew from its spermoid gasket and swung aside. The 3 men clanked into the echoing airlock chamber, where a touch on a third stud slid shut the inner door and opened the outer. The night lay mysterious before them, full of exotic odors, unfamiliar sounds, and double shadows. The slender linguist clambered like an eager monkey down the thin rungs and stood inhaling deeply. He was adjusting his camera when Rogers whispered in his ear, "Come on, let's make a tour around the clearing." Into his microphone, the scout reported, "Beginning our circuit, Chief. Circling counterclockwise." Rifles unslung, the two began walking cautiously. They had gone about halfway, and Stuart was studying the 2 moons, when his feet were abruptly yanked out from under him and he fell to the ground. The patch of pinkish grass under him seemed to ripple, rolling him over and over helplessly until he was brought up against a rounded hummock. Before he could struggle to his feet, he came floundering back again to be dumped at the edge of the patch. Sitting up dazedly, he found Rogers looking for something to shoot at. "What the devil happened?" whispered the scout. Gordon's voice came over the earphones. "What's going on down there? All I can hear up here in the turret is grunts and whispers, but what I see sure looks screwy." Stuart got up lamely, rubbing his sore leg. "I was sniffed at and rejected, in a manner of speaking," he answered. "Watch." He drew his handgun, which happened to be the most convenient thing, and tossed it on the animated grass before the flabbergasted scout could stop him. Immediately it was whisked away to the central hump, brushed with feelers, and sent tumbling back to his feet. "A most intriguing experience," murmured the linguist, studying the pink grass with his head cocked to one side. "I shall have to try it again when there's more time." He picked up the gun and limped away on patrol. Rogers, with an expression of surprised scorn and amusement on his handsome face, explained briefly to Gordon what had happened. As he caught up with Stuart, he glanced toward the nose of the special agent. "See anything yet, Chief?" In the nose turret, 2 gun barrels continued their sweep. "Nope," came back Gordon's voice. "There's a broad prairie just beyond the trees on the east side of this clearing, if you remember. Plain as day in this double moonlight. Almost looks like my home state, except for a few hills of that phosphorescent coral rock. Maybe, hey, some kind of critters running toward the hills. About 5 kilometers away. Flashes." He broke off, as if absorbed in watching. The 2 men on the ground slowly continued their patrol, listening intently. In about 15 seconds, above the faint rustling of the leaves in the pre-dawn breeze, they heard far-off snarling roars, mingled with crackling explosions. Almost total silence followed, as if the whole forest were listening. "All quiet," Gordon reported after a while. "Must have been what the traders called hellcats, attacking some native settlement. Looks like we made a fair guess about where to find some natives. We also know where they keep some of their pop guns," added Rogers sarcastically. Gordon's voice chuckled. "Patrol says the only known weapon has an apparent range of 2 or 3 kilometers at most, and probably is not portable." The scout looked skeptical. "Patrol says," he repeated sourly. "Apparently, probably, maybe. I notice our old buddies haven't cared to get within 100 kilometers of said pop gun." When the tour around the ship had been completed, Rogers looked up. "Okay, Chief. Ready for the nets." Far up in the nose appeared a black hole. White climbed out and spread a conical camouflage net over the nose. Then he ducked back into the ship. "Here comes the first strip," said Gordon. "I hope this gimmick works." A slot opened behind the skirt of the conical net, and a sheet of nylon camouflage unrolled downward. Rogers seized the bundle of stakes at its lower end and had the strip pegged down in a few seconds, with willing but ineffectual help from the inexperienced Stewart. "All right so far," the scout reported. Another strip came down. Stewart grabbed the stakes, then put them down to rearrange the rifle slung across his back. Suddenly there was a blur of movement and the stakes disappeared around a fin. Rogers, carrying the rubber mallet, walked up and nudged him. "Come on. Dawn's about to break, laddie. What are you staring at?" His own eyes widened as the bundle of stakes came back and dropped near his feet. He whipped out a flashlight and revealed a pair of monkey rats scurrying away. He laughed and shook his head. "Things around here have a cockeyed way of putting back what they don't want. I suppose these fellers were after metal, like Venus blacksmith lizards." The 2 men resumed working, and at length the entire ship was tented. Not long after they had finished, the light was strong enough to show the beady-eyed little monkey rats sitting nearby, watching curiously. The fearless creatures, as large as cocker spaniels, were an indeterminate red-gray in color, 4-legged, and had 2 6-fingered tentacles where Stewart expected muzzled. Bright black eyes looked out from under bony ridges. The monkey rats carried short spears, and seemed to have pouches slung on their backs. "Too bad we can't feed them," murmured the scout. "I bet we can make friends with them. We better explore a little more, though, first." Stewart strolled with him to where a narrow neck of turf led from the clearing out to the prairie. A brook followed this little alley into the woods. Rogers pointed to the near bank, where a miniature scaffolding of bright orange and blue matchsticks stood a few centimeters high. "Construction planned," said the linguist, remembering a trader's description. Nearby were 3 mossbacks, looking like turtles with tufts of green on their backs. Possibly symbiotic, Stewart thought to himself. The creatures dabbled their forelegs in the water and blinked sleepily. The monkey rats, following the men, apparently discovered the mossbacks just then. There was a sudden squirrel-like chittering sound as one of them pointed with a tentacle. Immediately 2 small spears flashed through the early morning light and chunked into one of the mossbacks. The creature squawked once and fell over. Its companions looked at it stupidly for a moment, then dove clumsily into the brook. The monkey rats dashed over to their prey, seized it with their tentacles, and began to hustle it toward the nearby trees. Without warning, a sky-colored creature like a hawk swooped over them and dropped a rock. One of the monkey rats was hit in the leg and fell sprawling. The other whistled with rage and hurled an ineffectual spear. The hawk came back a moment later and began to bomb them with more rocks. The injured one was being half-carried by its companion, and both were screaming angrily. Rogers scowled at the battle. "Looks like he doesn't want to leave his friend," he growled. Suddenly he whipped out a hunting knife, aimed for an imperceptible split second, and let fly. The hawk was slashed open down the belly from head to tail. It flopped heavily onto the patch of pink grass, snapping with vicious gray teeth in dying hatred. The uninjured monkey rat ran to retrieve the knife. The 2 men went to look at the wounded one and found it dragging a bleeding hind leg. It seemed especially shocking to Stewart, somehow, that the blood was red, although of a more brilliant shade than that of terrestrial mammals. The creature turned to face the men, waving a spear defensively and shrilling for help. Its companion came charging up with the knife and 2 spears. The 2 forms of life eyed each other for a moment. "Here's your opportunity to make friends with them," urged Gordon over the radio. "They seem accustomed to man-like beings. Maybe they can be of some use to us. Worth trying, anyway." The scouts squatted and made soothing sounds. Stewart backed away a few steps, so as to represent less of a threat, and began taking pictures as unobtrusively as possible. Rogers studied the situation in a moment, then extended his empty hands, palms up, in response to a whispered suggestion from the semanticist. Both monkey rats cocked their heads and watched him sharply, murmuring to each other. Moving slowly as Stewart directed, the scout tore a strip of bandage from his first aid packet and allowed it to be examined. He reached for one of the wooden spears, needle-tipped with something like obsidian, but it was withdrawn hastily. He broke off a small branch from a nearby bush and tried to splint the broken leg. The creature squealed and snapped at him, but neither monkey rat threatened him with a weapon. They seemed more curious than afraid. Nonplussed for a moment, the Earthman whistled softly, thinking. "Give them your other knife," suggested Stewart. The scout drew it out and dropped it hastily before a spear could be launched at him. 2 knives. The creatures examined them with obvious pleasure, testing the blades and inspecting them closely. Again Rogers reached out, this time his touch was tolerated. "Warm-blooded," he said quietly into his microphone. "Feels like 2 bones in the upper leg." He succeeded in straightening the limb and tying it up. Then he pantomimed carrying the victim and pointed into the woods. The other monkey rat pushed the injured one toward him and made tentacle motions which evidently meant yes. He picked up the one with the broken leg, carried it a short distance into the woods, and set it down. The other followed, bristling with knives and spears. Stewart came behind at a discreet distance, observing carefully and making notes. Occasionally he snapped a picture. The scout poured some water into the palm of his hand and offered it. The injured animal shot out a tubular orange tongue and sucked up the water. The 2 men were trying to establish further communication when suddenly their earphones crackled. "You men outside. Stand by the neck of the clearing. There's been some shooting over near those coral rocks, and here comes a native hell for leather with 3 hellcats after him. Heading for the clearing, I think. Try to catch him, he seems to be unarmed. We'll get out and hold off the hellcats from up here." 3. Rogers was belly down in the grass at one side of the entrance before Gordon finished talking. Stewart dashed after him, noticing absently as he passed the pink grass that it was churning and enveloping the carcass of the dead hawk. He reached the edge of the clearing and took up a position across the brook from Rogers. He could see nothing but dust through the grass and heavy scrub. The canteen gouged into his flank, and his holster seemed caught in a root. He struggled to get the blast rifle unslung from his back, wishing for the 20th time that he had had at least a little experience at this sort of thing. Just one hitch in the patrol, for instance. The radio broke in on his whispered swearing. "You might have to do some shooting down there. These machine guns may not stop all the hellcats dead in their tracks, but I don't want to use anything bigger, no use letting the neighborhood know what we've got." A few seconds later the native came pounding desperately through the alley into the clearing. "Hold him!" yelled the scout. Stewart sprang to his feet with a leveled rifle and confronted the astounded humanoid, who collided with a tree and stopped. Nestor came dodging out through the nets to cover the prisoner with another gun. The brilliant red man-like creature, obviously understanding the weapons, still tried to edge away from the squalling roars of the hellcats not far behind on the prairie. The twin 60mm guns in the nose burst out with a clatter. The noise of the exploding projectiles was deafening. Clumps of dirt and scrub flew high into the air. Then Nestor's blast rifle roared once, sharply. Nestor's blast rifle roared once, sharply. Abruptly there was silence. The Azuran had obviously discovered the ship behind the camouflage. He stared at it, blinked, and stared again, as though in disbelief. Stewart began taking pictures of him. "No more cats," came Gordon's voice. "They were bunched up and Nestor got 'em all. Ah, I notice our new friend has seen through the camouflage net." The native's reaction was sudden, unexpected. He shuddered and slumped to the ground, a picture of dejection. His tentacles were limp. Nothing would induce him to communicate. At length Stewart offered water. The native suddenly arose, as if in a hopeless rage, knocked the canteen aside, and kicked the linguist's injured leg. Then the red being sank to the ground again. "Damn!" growled Stewart through clenched teeth. He rubbed his leg. "I suppose he thinks we're the invaders, coming back to ravage his people again. Either he never saw the invaders himself, or we happen to resemble them. Or maybe the terror of the invasion was so great that a serious semantic confusion exists, labeling all strangers as bad. Well, at any rate, I'll have to go through some semantic analysis to establish any rapport at all." Meditating on the problem, He sent Nestor back to the ship for drawing materials, and bent over to retrieve the canteen. The native immediately knocked him flat and fled into the woods. Rogers started after the Azuran, unslinging his gun, but Gordon spoke up from the airlock, where he had been about to climb down to the ground. "Dan! Get out of those woods, you halfwit! Let him go, you can't possibly catch him. Anyway, we may be able to see where he goes, if he breaks out into open country again. White, will you keep an eye on the edge of the woods from up there? Be ready to man the scope. I'll be right up." Nestor sat down beside the linguist a few minutes later and held out a cup of fragrant coffee. "Here, Mr. Stewart. I figured you guys could use breakfast better than drawing materials right now. Feel okay?" Stewart sipped and nodded gratefully. Yes, fine, thanks." The plump little flight engineer handed him a sandwich. "You're due for relief about now anyway. The boss and I will be out here, and White and Bretner inside. You and Rogers can sleep a while." The linguist leaned back against a tree and lit a cigarette. "Has the native showed up again?" he asked his microphone. White answered. "Yeah. He hightailed it across the prairie and disappeared among the coral rocks. Chief says for you to come in, Stewart. He wants to know what you found out." Stewart picked up his rifle, canteen, camera, and cup. He wondered vaguely, as he trudged wearily over to the ship, how he had gotten so tired. Then he realized that, like the others, he had gotten only 5 hours sleep in the past 2 nights. Procyon was yellow-white and hot on his back, even through the netting, as he clambered up the fin rungs. He felt sleepy. In the captain's crowded little cabin he dropped into a chair and yawned. Gordon stretched, scratching lazily, and grinned at him. "Bored, on your first day ashore?" The linguist smiled ruefully. "Tired, yes, but hardly bored. I don't mind admitting the first few hours have been rather disappointing. We had a native right here, I stood face to face with him, and we even saved his life. Well, no use yowling about it. I presume he's gone off to warn the others now. Our element of surprise, as you fellows say, is lost." He brushed the hair out of his eyes. "What shall we do about it, Gordon?" The leader drummed on the desk a while. "I dunno. This sort of situation was never covered in patrol courses. Maybe the general staff studies this stuff, but I was just a line officer, like the other guys. If you remember, we figured we'd sort of make up our operations plan as we went along. You probably know as much about it as we do, from all your reading. Nothing predictable about any of this, we just have to react to whatever develops. What would you suggest?" Well, I've a half-formed scheme for, seizing the bull by the horns. The natives are certain to react immediately, either by attacking us or by disappearing again. I feel that we should assume the initiative as soon as possible, without waiting for them to maneuver one of their weapons within range of us. "How do we assume the initiative?" "Yes, exactly, how?" The semanticist shook his head. "I'll have to sleep on it at least a little while, Gordon. Right now I feel unable to think. But somehow we have to convey to the Azurans the knowledge that we are friendly. We'll have to find some way of representing the idea to them." "Drop leaflets," suggested Gordon, wryly. "Or put up one of those billboards they used to have all over 100 years ago. Everybody in the universe must have become accustomed to some kind of advertising by now." He laughed heartily. "Okay, Stewart. Go fall into your bunk. Let's hope you wake up with a good idea." The thoughtful little language expert got up to leave. Billboard. There may be something in that, even if you were joking." His musings were broken off by the alarm bell and the intercom squawk. "All hands. Battle stations. Chief, 3 natives just popped up from a hole in the ground about 200 meters away. Strong radar indication." As Stewart ran down to his post at the airlock, he heard Gordon's calm voice from the intercom. "All right, Bretner. Keep them covered, but don't fire." At the lock, the linguist remembered to punch the personnel buttons as the men climbed in, out of breath and swearing. He pushed the stud beside his own name last and shut the lock as the all aboard shone green. Gordon spoke again, apparently to someone in the control room with him. "They've evidently lugged a disruptor or something along the tunnel. Seem to have a couple of big beasts of burden carrying a gadget, looks like one of those old pack howitzers. Let's wait till they get it nearly assembled, so we can get an idea of, Let's go. Stuart had forgotten to buckle his safety straps. He just had time to grab a stanchion when the violent acceleration tripled his weight and nearly threw him to the floor. No more than a heartbeat later, there was a muffled boom from outside the ship, and a section of blazing tree went rocketing past the glassite window. After a few seconds' acceleration, he felt the ship take on a horizontal component. The pressure eased off. He got up from his hands and knees and adjusted the periscope controls until he got a view of the ground. There was a group of burning trees several kilometers below, sliding rapidly to the east. Several times the scenery shifted rapidly as the ship zigzagged. As he swung the scope, Stuart was thunderstruck to discover a hole blasted in the edge of a fin, not 4 meters away from where he stood. Shreds of charred camouflage netting fluttered in tangled strings. On the intercom, White's voice broke the tense silence. "Gimme that again, slowly, somebody. What happened, anyway?" Gordon answered. "That must have been a tunnel they came out of, right at the edge of the woods. Maybe they use it to get home if hellcats happen to catch them out on the prairie. That fellow we caught today was probably heading for it, hoping to lose the cats in the woods first." After a moment, he added, "Anyway, they showed up with a heavy weapon and nearly got us. Patrol guessed wrong about its portability, and I guessed wrong about its operation." Stuart commented, "Good thing someone happened to be on duty in the turret, and we were able to take off on such short notice." "Happened?" barked the captain. "Mr. Stuart, that's the first rule of any ship landing on territory listed as unsafe, and it happens to be rules 7 through 16 of the patrol regulations." Breton eased the linguist's embarrassment by changing the subject a little. "Did you all see the colossal helpers they had carrying that weapon? Must be what the traders called heffalumps. I thought the pictures were fakes. Those critters practically did the shooting themselves, and they were talking to the natives. This is some planet, everybody talks to everybody except us." Gordon spoke again. "White, I want you to rig up a mosaic alarm with controls in the turret, number 1 lock, and control room, before tonight, if possible. Jury-rig it, just so it goes off when anything larger than a mossback moves near the ship. Get as much range as you can. That means dismantling the space probe and comparator, boss. Not enough spare checkerboards to scan 360 degrees with a decent vertical coverage. And for stereo perception, so the thing can discriminate between a nearby leaf and a faraway heffalump. Alright, do the best you can. Can you hook it up with an infrared snooper for night work? I don't believe the natives can see infrared, I hope. Proceon's a little farther toward the blue than Sol is. I'll see what I can do. Can't get very good resolution with the electro-optical stuff we have for infrared. We had to weed out 4 tons, you know, and the Hallman scanners are 3.5 parsecs back, in our shop." Stuart noticed that the ship's course had steadied. A look through the scope showed the recently abandoned clearing now swinging under the stern again, far below. He was about to take a picture of it when Gordon called him. "Stuart, will you go to the drive room and give Nestor a hand? He's scanning the area with microwave, and I want you to use the stern view telescope. Those characters may have decided to go back to their base without using the tunnel. Maybe we can keep out of sight and get a good fix on where they hole up." The linguist retracted the periscope and saw to it that the guard plates slid over the outer lens. Then he dodged through the radiation trap into the darkened drive room. He was wondering how to strap himself into the seat without taking off all his photographic gear, when Nestor, peering into the radar screen, snapped his fingers. "Got a blip, Gordon," said the engineer with suppressed excitement. "One metallic object about the size of a footlocker, maybe a little bigger. Boy, do those rocks show up. Must be nearly all metal." In a moment the leader answered. "I believe I see something. Awkward angle, though, on this turret telescope. How about you, Stuart?" "No, frankly, Gordon cut in. "What magnification are you using?" "Let me see, all I can get, 64 diameters." "Too much. Cut it down to 12. Center your scope. Now look at the crosshair grids. Find the lower part of F7, you should see something around there. More likely F6 from here," put in Nestor. "That's where my indication is." "Oh, yes. I see them. 3 natives and 2, my goodness, those heffalumps are big. Almost as big as elephants." Gordon answered, "Yes, and apparently considerably more useful. Well, Keep a sharp watch on the group. Let me know where they go, and be sure you mark the spot on a large-scale sketch or photo. I've got to send off a report to patrol. We're keeping them posted on every development. Like a bomb-defusing squad, said Nestor hollowly. The next crew will take up where we left off, see? The ship, swinging slowly ahead of the little raiding party, came to a stop about 6 kilometers above and slightly beyond the coral rocks. White spoke over the intercom. I don't think they'll see us here. We're in the sun. But keep yourselves strapped in, gang, we're going to move in a hurry if they point that thing at us. You guys below let me know if they do anything suspicious. I can't see too much on the control room screens. In the drive room, the power hummed softly. Relays clicked occasionally as the minutes passed. The creatures on the ground entered a faint trail winding among the hills of bright coral rock. Now and then one of the heffalumps stopped and adjusted the load on his back, using the middle 2 of his 6 limbs. Nestor nudged the language expert's arm. Looks like they're getting close to home. Better get set to take some pictures. Stuart nodded, having already picked up a plate magazine, and loaded the camera box on the side of the telescope. He adjusted the controls from time to time with nervous delicacy, occasionally tapping the shutter button. Suddenly he switched to higher magnification, exclaiming, "There they go. Into that cave." He took 3 pictures in rapid succession at different magnifications. He also banged his nose hard on the eyepiece, and wondered some hours later how it came to be so tender. There was a clatter of feet on the steel ladder. Gordon came running over to him, an unfinished report in one hand and a half-eaten hamburger in the other. "Let's see," he demanded. The linguist showed him. Only the cave mouth could be seen now, black in the hot sunlight. It was halfway up a hill of dense coral, and was protected from the front by another hill. The chief took a bite of hamburger and grinned at Stuart. "This is a bit of luck," he said happily through the mouthful. "We wouldn't have found that hideout in 10 years if they hadn't taken a pot-shot at us." Nestor exhaled cigarette smoke, looking cynical. "Swell. What do we do now? Wave a hanky at them?" Gordon's expression became less cheerful. "We don't know yet. Things have moved a little fast. But whatever we do, we'll have to get it done fast. You guys might as well know now what came in a little while ago on the radio." He drew a deep breath. "An invader base has been discovered, within striking distance of this area. It's a jolt, of course, but at least we've finally discovered a base of theirs. Earth Central says either we close this deal in 4 days or the planet will have to be taken over the hard way." Stuart shook his head sadly, thinking of the already ruined cities below. "Our little firm had better live up to its name," he said. Gordon nodded. "A task force is already on the way." Bretner had come cat-footed down the ladder. "There's one way to hustle things up," he growled, patting his hip holster. "I wish you'd let me blister their stern plates a little. Little old frontier lawyer here would teach 'em some manners right now." Stuart repressed a shudder. The captain strode over and confronted the scout with a frown. "That's what we're here to avoid, Mr. Bretner, and you know it. Our weapons are purely for defense, and there'd be hell raised if we harmed any natives. If we got out of here alive, we'd lose our 1,000,000 credits and all our expenses, as well as being tried for unauthorized warlike acts." He sounded hoarse with fatigue and irritation. "Get over any belligerent ideas you may have. That goes for all of you, at least on this trip." He looked sternly at the group a moment, then nodded toward the ladder. "Let's go have a conference. Nestor, will you stay here and keep a sharp eye on that hideout?" The chubby engineer leaned back in the seat, swung the eyepiece over into a comfortable position, and sighed. "Yeah, all right. Somebody better bring me some food before long, though. I'm dying."